I'm going to start the recording. All right, there we go. Good day, everyone. Thanks for some of you who are able to join us today. We are recording this session, and we'll be passing this out, providing it to our other employers in the community for information purposes, and hopefully we can generate some additional back and forth about matters regarding employment for major employers and how transportation can be a potential component of addressing some of the employment challenges for our employers here in Wanaki. So quick round of introductions for those who are going to be presenting or representing the village and the MPO here. My name is Todd Schmidt. I'm the village administrator in Wanaki. Until just last week, I also had the co-title of Economic Development Director. That title is now, that baton is passed to Tim Semin. Tim is on the line with us. I'll have Tim introduce himself as our new Community Development Director. But why don't you go ahead, Tim?
Good morning, everybody. Yeah, Tim Semin here, the village's new Community Development Director. So just started last week, but be glad to be participating in this morning's discussion.
All right, thanks, Tim. And we're glad, the village is glad to be partnering with the Madison area MPO. And I'll let Bill and his team explain exactly what that organization is and what they do. But Ben, is it pronounced Zia or Zia?
Zia.
Zia, all right, thanks. And Bill, let me turn it over to you three for your introductions.
Okay, I'll just start off to introduce myself. I'm Bill Schaefer, the planning manager and director for the Greater Madison MPO, and got a couple of our staff with me, Ben Lyman, who's our transit planner, and Zia Bukaya, who administers our transportation options program. And so I'm going to turn it over to Ben to start the presentation, which includes a brief introduction about the MPO.
I would just also note that I do see Ellen Schaff is on. Ellen is the director of the Waunakee Area Chamber of Commerce, certainly also engaged with our local business community. And so welcome, Ellen.
Thanks, Todd. Thanks for including me.
Yep, and I see Roberta. Roberta is the local editor for the Waunakee Tribune, so I'm glad Roberta is here as well.
Great, thank you very much, Todd. Can I get a thumbs up from somebody that you can see my screen here? So I want to make sure I've got the right one shared. Excellent. All right. Well, hey, thanks for having us today. It's always really great to get to reach out to new communities in our planning area and see what we can do to work with you to assist with your transportation needs. We put together a little presentation here about workforce transportation options and resources, kind of tailored to the Waunakee area. The Greater Madison, just a couple slides about what we are. The Greater Madison MPO is the designated metropolitan planning area. Hang on, I seem to have hidden one of the screens that I really wanted here. There we go. So we're the designated metropolitan planning organization. That's the MPO. We're federally required and created by basically act of local bodies and then the signature of the governor. We're responsible for cooperative regional transportation planning and decision making. We approve the use of federal funding in our planning area. We here be our planning and policy board. And then the rideshare, et cetera program, Zia will go into, and that's one of our programs. You can see from our governance structure icon there that our board is made up of a reasonably representative board of different areas. City of Madison being the largest community has the most people on board. And then Metro and towns, the suburban communities, and the county itself and WSDOT all have seats at the table as well. This is our official planning area. We do some planning outside this area because we must also obviously consider travel into and out of the area as well. This is the area in which we have to review and approve the use of federal funding for transportation projects. Our primary responsibilities, we can kind of highlight in two columns. We have what the MPO does and what the MPO does not do. In addition to providing a forum for regional transportation decision-making and preparing the regional transportation plan, these include leading or supporting other special plans and studies and approving federal funding for projects through adoption of the Transportation Improvement Program. Finally, the MPO manages a program to promote sustainable transportation options. The MPO is strictly a planning and funding agency. We do not design or construct projects, and we don't operate transit. So we have kind of outlined in this next section various workforce transportation options that we think would be reasonable for you to consider, or at least to be aware of. We're going to focus primarily on commuter bus service and employee van pools, which appear to be the most relevant options for Wanaki employers who are seeking better access for employees who live outside the village. And that's sort of how we understood the desire for today's conversation to go. So I'll touch on the other four options, but really we're going to be looking at the first two primarily.
If I could, Ben, if I could just jump in quick, it does look like we're a relatively small audience today with just a couple of businesses represented. Would you welcome comments or questions right in the midst of your presentation?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Why don't we do it? Yeah, let's do it that way. So either just jump in or do the raise hand feature and unmute, and we can just be engaging like that.
Great. So here we have the bus rapid transit system. Initial service changes are planned for implementation with the network redesign that Metro is currently working on in 2022. Some of the reconstruction of roads, construction of the large BRT shelters, the full system won't open until 2024. The purpose of showing this to you is that there's going to be 15-minute service, so bus every 15 minutes or better, on both the east-west and the north-south BRT corridors. So basically in the far left, the blue line over at the West Town Mall area, running across the Isthmus and then up towards Sun Prairie is the east-west route. And then the north-south route would be from the north transfer point to the south transfer point on those dotted orange lines. And so this really provides a great opportunity for any local buses to tie into that network, where even if a bus was coming once an hour to Wanaki or once every half hour to Wanaki, there'd be a pretty convenient transfer to and from the BRT system. This slide, we show some potential or conceptual Waunakee Express bus routes. The lower left-hand image is from our current regional transportation plan, long-range transportation plan, which we're currently in the process of updating. The conceptual map, the larger map on the right, that sort of lollipop circle at the top at the village. Conceptually, it would reverse routes or reverse direction in the AM and PM. So northbound buses in the morning from Madison would be dropping off employees at the business park first, and then it would be able to loop south through the residential areas of Waunakee and take folks who want to ride into Madison, and the rest of the Metro network would be able to jump on there. And in the afternoon, it would reverse. So people who were coming home to Waunakee would be able to get off the bus first, and then they would leave those seats open to be filled folks who are leaving the business park and headed back towards Madison and wherever they live there. Again, this is just a conceptual, just an idea, but one that I think could make sense. There are quite a few route planning considerations to think about before trying to jump in and operate a new bus route. First, it always comes down to the dollars. The hourly operating cost is estimated by Metro for this year at $90 to $100 an hour of when the bus is on the road, before around 50-55% state funding reimbursement for those operational costs. As Justin Sturenberg, the director of Metro, indicated when he was providing these numbers to me, Estimating service partner operating costs is very difficult because of the number of variables at play, including fare revenues and state funding. So any fares that would be collected on the Wanaki route would count towards Wanakee's contribution as a service partner. And so if you have full buses, then you have lots of fares and you would be paying less. If you have 3 people on a full-size bus, you're not collecting a lot of fares and be bearing most of those operational costs. Currently, Sun Prairie and Verona also get 55% of their costs reimbursed by the state after they're paid to Metro. In total, Verona's paying about $90 an hour for its 5,800 hours, and Sun Prairie is paying about $110 an hour for 3,100 hours. And again, that's before the approximate 55% state operational funding. Another thing to consider is your service frequency or the number of trips. Is this going to be 1 trip out and 1 trip in the morning and again in the afternoon? Is it something that's going to be running every hour for a period of time? The service duration, is this something that's going to be running all day, or would it be shift specific? So you have, shift turnover, say 3 times a day, and you only have buses that correspond to those shift turnover times. Would you be looking just for a reverse commute, as we would call it, looking at a regional area, the employees leaving Madison in the morning and headed to Waunakee, and then when most commuters would be headed the opposite direction, those folks would be headed from Waunakee back to Madison in the afternoon. That's what we mean by reverse commute. Or would it include local service for residents who are commuting to Madison? And then also the question of, depending on where the desired riders were coming from, it might make sense to have a connection to North Madison and or to Middleton, depending on, again, where those employees were coming from. Sun Prairie laid the groundwork for their commuter bus service for years. This doesn't necessarily need to be the case in Waunakee. Certainly, if it's a business rider employee specific service, then it's less important to know what residents of Waunakee might want or find useful, or if they care at all. If you're really just trying to get outside employees into the area, but it can still be a long process. So it's something it's good that you're starting to talk about it. In terms of implementation, sort of a rough outline of steps if you wanted to start having local bus service. There is a Section 5304 statewide transit planning grant available that would help cover the costs. I think it's an 80-20, so 20% local funding, 80% match from the state for transit planning grant. Various surveys that you might want to start conducting. We'll talk about those a bit more in a bit here. Service and needs analysis and identification of appropriate services and programs. Again, is this something that's going to be serving 2-way traffic throughout the day? Is it something that's just covering 3 shift turnovers? Depending on what your needs are and what your desires are, the service alternatives could be very different. And then finally, operational funding. This is that 50 to 55% reimbursement that the state provides to both Sun Prairie and Verona currently. And applications for that funding are accepted every fall. It's unclear as to exactly when those funds become available, but since you probably wouldn't be operating this fall quite yet, you probably don't have to worry about it this fast. Another possibility that this may actually be, depending on what you're looking for, this may be a better fit for Waunakee and your needs. It could also be sort of a foot in the door, starting your transit service with much smaller vehicles and lower overhead. So in employee van pools, generally speaking, each rider will pay a fare calculated to cover their share of administrative overhead, operating and capital costs. It may be subsidized by employers. The van is driven by an employee who, in exchange for driving and maintenance services, is not required to pay a fee. The images here show the state Department of Administration van pools, which are currently designed only for travel to jobs in Madison from other areas. I think there's something like 12 or 13 of these vans just from Milwaukee every day. The top image is from Poinet, just a single van coming down from Poinet every day. These routes could be the same as those that we showed earlier for transit. They could be operated by a particular company or a consortium of companies or by the community. An example of a single employer van pool, especially cheese company out of Reeseville. They had a pilot project starting in 2018. They had 15 volunteer employees in terms of the van pool service, one driver who was an independent contractor. They only had enough rider for one shift and one route. A year later, they had 35 new hires. They were up to 11 regular drivers and 2 alternates, covering 3 shifts a day, 3 daily routes, plus ad hoc runs for when people had other needs, and 300 unique trips each pay period. So business benefit, headcount was up, new production records set, larger, more reliable workforce on 3rd shift, tardiness and absenteeism significantly reduced. So in the absence of a publicly administered van pool program, a single business or a group of businesses could purchase vans and administer their own program. This is, I think, a great example of that and how it really did benefit this company. Another possibility, if you don't want to buy your own vehicles, there are various agencies or companies that do this in this area. The one that we're most familiar with is Commute with Enterprise. They do the connection of coworkers living near each other. They take care of onboarding the new riders and the maintenance. They provide the vehicle. They provide the reporting. They do have some needs. They need at least 4 people per vehicle. A given company could subsidize it so that the individual riders aren't paying the entire cost. And then each rider who signed up through that gets 1 guaranteed ride home. That's the GRH there, per person per quarter. And we'll get into this a little bit more, but the program that ZIA administers also offers what we have been calling a guaranteed ride home. And I think we're moving to an emergency ride home. A little bit better messaging in terms of what its purpose is there, but she'll talk more about that. Another possibility probably wouldn't be terribly appropriate for what Wanaki is looking for, but it may be something that could be the right tool for the job, depending on how you determine your service needs. A deviated route service where part of the route is on a designated route and people can go and stand and wait for the bus and they know it's going to come. Other sections of it, they need to call ahead because the bus can leave that route and pick people up. It works a lot better for picking up riders who are dispersed through a geographic area. It's generally not applicable to serving concentrations of residents or jobs. So the Monona Lift example, they deviate from that blue line in Monona to pick people up if they need to get picked up at their front door or but closer to their house than that line is. But when they hit the green line, then that's their set service route that they alternate directions in morning and afternoon. Other example on the left, the Denver RTD Flex Ride, basically small neighborhood circulators that tie into the larger network. There we go. Another possibility could work for you. Don't think it's quite right, but we might not have all the whole picture here. A shared ride taxi service, again, best suited for local service. It can have scheduled service to or from specific destinations. Both Stoughton and Sun Prairie operate these systems. The city owns the vehicles, and then the service is operated under contract. Currently, both communities are operated by Running Incorporated, hence the very similar branding of the vehicles. One nice thing about that is because the city owns the vehicle and it's considered public transit, you are eligible for other transit funding that a private operator would not be in terms of vehicle purchases. Some common elements in a lot of shared ride taxi services. They would have a flat fare within the city, no matter how far you're going. Fares would then increase outside the city limits. The map of Sun Prairie there is their cost map. And you may have special destinations outside that standard service area. Sun Prairie has scheduled rides to the East Town Mall on that. They may have discontinued that since Route 23 started operating. I'm not exactly sure. I think they still do operate that though. So that's something that, again, probably not the right tool for Waunakee, but could be worth considering. A TNC, so a transportation network company such as Uber or Lyft, or a taxi company partnership. These can be community or employer subsidized. Employers can determine if they're going to pay for a specific number of rides per month, if they're going to deduct a portion of the cost of each ride from a participating employee's wages, a combination of the two options. They basically, all of these companies, Zerology, Green Cab, Union Cab, Uber, and Lyft have these business platforms where you can set up those accounts as you like to be able to support your employees going to and from work, but not necessarily, going to the airport or going out for a night on the town. Mentioned earlier, we come back to the various surveys. This is an example of an employee survey that was conducted in DeForest. Employee surveys are useful for gauging interest in new programs by existing employees, but they're not really very helpful in determining what would help attract new employees, which is what we, again, believe is probably the intention for this group. So there, it makes a bit more sense to conduct surveys of HR or management staff at various companies, and they can help ascertain the level of interest in a cooperative transportation program by the company. And they can also help identify current transportation barriers to hiring qualified employees. So those folks in HR who said, gosh, we interviewed all these people and we offered these people these jobs, and 2 of them can't get here from South Madison in time for the shift start. So that isn't going to work. Those folks are probably going to be your best bet to get that information. And so an employer survey or worksite survey may be a more appropriate way to determine the level of interest and demand for this. And then finally, workforce housing. There is a very strong transportation land use connection, to the point that transportation is ultimately only required as a connection between land uses. If you think about a mixed use building, you live upstairs, there's a grocery store on the first floor, and your office is somewhere else in the building. All you need is the stairway or the elevator. You don't need any other transportation. If you're in a mixed use area and your employment is down the block and grocery store is another block the other direction, you can walk, you can bike, you can use a skateboard, you can skip. The further apart the destination and origin are, the more you need real transportation. And so building workforce housing closer to employment centers ultimately reduces the need for transportation and increases the number of transportation modes that can reasonably be used to complete the trip. So although we are not in the land use side of things, it would be remiss to not mention that according to the Wanaki Housing Task Force summary report, your workforce can't really afford the housing that's in Wanaki. And so that's what this is. And I'm sure you're all familiar with that report, so I won't go into it. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Zia, unless anyone has any questions before we move on.
I would just note quick, there is one company in Waunakee. I think they specialize a little more in some senior or medical transportation, and that's Gogh Taxi. Are you familiar with Gogh, and could they be a player in this picture?
Yeah, Gogh is a specialized transportation provider, non-emergency medical transportation. They do primarily people who with mobility impairments, disabilities, getting rides to medical and other appointments. They do operate at least some accessible vehicles. I think they also have some sedans. I communicate with them at least a few times a year regarding our Section 5310 program, which is what funds the purchase of the Stoughton and Sun Prairie shared ride taxi vehicles. And that money is available for other specialized transportation providers and taxi companies, as long as they're doing shared rides. So the first rider can't say, I want this to be a private taxi. The driver can't say, I want this to be a private ride. If it makes sense to pick up a second or third person, then they need to be able to do that, which actually improves efficiency because they've got now multiple riders on a single run. But that makes them public transportation in federal eyes, and so they're eligible for additional funding. So that would be another potential partner that you could look to. That said, again, their focus is definitely on that non-emergency medical transportation for people who have mobility impairments. But
One other thing I'd maybe toss out there as an option, or at least something I heard from a local not-for-profit organization. Actually, it was a church, I believe. The pastor had mentioned to me, as a service to the community, the concept of entering this deliver this service delivery as a service to the community at large. Do you see do nonprofits get involved like that you've seen in other communities?
Yeah, to varying degrees, absolutely. At the county level, there's the RSVP, it's Retired Senior Volunteer Driver Program, and they are reimbursed for their mileage under state grant funding. But that's again primarily tailored at the county level to seniors and people with disabilities getting driven around by senior volunteers. The program obviously took a huge hit during COVID, and that just fully shut down because both drivers and passengers were people who were more at risk. It is ramping up again, but that's definitely, it's a countywide program. I think it's a decent model to look at. There's also Time Bank. The Dane County Time Bank has a transportation program where they have drivers who are reviewed and approved to get background checks and everything by the county. And then they volunteer to provide rides to other folks. So there are a couple other options out there. I'm personally not aware of a full-fledged, local community transit program that's all just volunteer, goodness of our heart for the benefit of the community. I think it's a great idea. It might be tricky keeping it sustainable. People are interested for a couple of years, and then those individuals move on, lack interest. It could be more difficult to keep it going, but it's certainly worth looking into. If you have people who want to volunteer to drive and have a vehicle, take them up on it.
Yeah, there's also the YWCA has a job ride program that's tailored toward there's income threshold requirements, so it's targeted towards low income individuals. But that is another program. We actually, with our funding, purchased a couple vans for that for that program a few years ago. But that's another one. But if Wanaki was going to provide some sort of service and was seeking to get that state operating funding, a requirement of that is to go through a bid process, request for bid, but that's not to say a nonprofit couldn't provide the service on a contract, paid service, if they bid on it. But if you just wanted to do it, outside of that process, then you could do it more informally. But,
Okay, good morning. I'll go ahead and give my part of the presentation. And again, yes, feel free to jump in at any time. So my name is Zia Brukaya, and I manage the Transportation Options Program, which is currently called Rideshare, et cetera, for the MPO. And the purpose of this program, it's a transportation demand management program. And really what we do is promote all kinds of alternative transportation to help reduce the amount of single occupancy vehicle driving that's happening in the region. And so we connect individuals, businesses and organizations, and agencies like cities and other members of the MPO area to resources. And we really focus on information, encouragement, and incentives. Next slide, please. And just a real quick background on kind of why the MPO is working in this space. So again, our interest is really to support a variety of options of transportation so that people are not reliant on their cars. We still have very high rates of driving alone to work in Madison and Dane County, less so in Madison. I think because a lot of the land use that Ben talked about, people are more able to walk and bike and take the bus and carpool. But it brings a lot of benefits to our region, you know, reducing congestion, reducing environmental impact, helping people get around more equitably so that if you don't have a car, you know, you still have options. And from the employer perspective, the graphic on the bottom left, we also know that employees' experience with the commute or their ability to commute really impacts employers' ability to attract and retain top talent. So, you know, it relates to whether someone is actually able to or interested in applying for a job. Then if they get the job, how satisfied they are at the job, how willing they are to stay, whether they're even able to stay. We get calls from folks often who, you know, work outside of Madison and their car breaks down or something else happens and they're really struggling to figure out a way to get to their next shift. And so it's really impacting employers and employees' ability to kind of, you know, be at a job and stay and have it work out. So we want to help with resources to lessen that burden. Next slide. So these are the main things that we do. Again, we assist all the way from the individual to the employer to the government level. We administer the rideshare, et cetera, online platform, and that's primarily a ride matching platform for individuals. You go on, you sign up, you say where you work, where you live, what your shift times are, and run a search for mostly for carpools, but it also will match people outside of Madison to the state van pool routes. And then it also includes metro transit routes, park and ride locations, and the option for people to search for a bike buddy if they would like to be bicycling to work. We also administer the Guaranteed Ride Home program that is funded by Dane County. And currently, as Ben mentioned, we'll be transitioning the name to Emergency Ride Home. But really the point is that, you know, so people feel comfortable leaving their car at home in case of emergency at work, if their kid gets sick or if they get sick, or if they're part of a carpool and their carpool driver has to leave early, they can use a Guaranteed Ride Home voucher to get home. And participants are able to use up to 6 rides per year through that program. We do a lot of marketing and outreach to promote all the different transportation options, and then coordinate with the regional partners, primarily that you see on the bottom right there, working closely with the county and DOT and Metro, and then groups like Sustain Dane that are also very interested in alternative transportation. Next slide. So for the individuals, this is the rideshare-etc.org that I mentioned. The bottom on the map here is what you see is like what someone would see when they run a search. So our hope is always that someone will enter their information and come up with a list of, you know, 20 potential matches. It definitely gets harder the further you get from Madison. So part of the ability of this website to really succeed is that the more people that are on it searching for matches, then the more options there are. So we really encourage, you know, this is something that we would love for you guys to be promoting to your staff. And, you know, they sign up, and it's something that once you're in the system, it will notify you. So maybe you don't have a match immediately, but in 6 months, if someone signs up and has a similar route, you'll be notified that, oh, there's a new match opportunity for you. So there are about 2,500 people on the site right now, about 1,100 who are active for matching. The others are in participating in guaranteed ride home, but they may already have a carpool or be in a van pool and not be needing to find other transportation. Next slide.
Do you happen to know how many Wanaki riders participate? Is that a piece of data you can pull from that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I wasn't able to pull that right before our presentation, but that's something that I'll look into and let you know. We
Okay.
should be able to find that by zip code.
You can find it for both residents and people working in Wanaki, right?
Mhm.
Search.
Yeah,
both
I
of
think
those?
so. I think so. I'll
I-
need to, yeah,
I
yeah,
zip-
definitely
yeah,
work
I-
location.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so then this is the guaranteed ride home program. And really, you know, the image here on the right, and then on the previous slide, there was a similar image. These are both posters. So this is the kind of marketing information that we can give to you. This is a poster you could print out and put up at a workplace, or an employer could take it and email it out as a PDF to employees, you know. So this is the kind of outreach and communication support that we can provide. Next slide. And then at the employer level, Ben touched on a few of these things like the surveys that we can help with. Really what we are able to do is help employers think about and develop a commute solutions program. So this is something that tends to be very common in, you know, larger cities and maybe other areas of the country. And there are some employers here. UW-Madison is a big one. They have a very strong commute solutions program where they promote a lot of different options for faculty and staff. But if you don't have something like that, it's definitely something we can help you with. And the surveys are a really good starting point, so we can provide examples, work with an employer to craft different questions, provide then once you get the results, you know, review them, think about the implications of the results, help with the program planning, think about incentives, just the types of transportation options that make sense to promote at your work sites, providing materials for communications, letting people know about rideshare, et cetera, guaranteed ride home. We can do a customized, like a branded matching page on rideshare, et cetera. If you are a company that is registered in rideshare, et cetera, and really all that means is that I go into the back end of the website and put your company in and assign it a special code, then any individual who goes on and says, I work at Waunakee Chamber of Commerce, they'll automatically match to that specially coded company that I've created, and then they'll be able to search within the other employees of that company. So that definitely works best for larger companies, but that's an option. And then we can always come attend, you know, as we start to do more in-person things, brown bags, fairs, any special events, we can be there to talk with folks. Next slide. And then coming up, this is something to be aware of. We are in the middle of rebranding from rideshare, et cetera, to Roundtrip. So Roundtrip will be the brand and the website within Dane County. Rideshare, et cetera, is a partnership that we have with the statewide Department of Transportation. And so rideshare, et cetera, will still exist as a statewide resource. People can run a match search on either website. But Roundtrip will be really specialized to Dane County, and we'll have some information on the website that's much more about all of the transportation options that are here unique to Dane County. We'll be automating the guaranteed ride home or emergency ride home voucher delivery. Right now it's paper vouchers, so very soon people will be able to get those on their phones. And then as part of the work that we're doing on just other transportation options and ways to reduce driving, looking at another remote work survey. So I think you guys will all receive that. We did one in June 2020 to see how what people were doing and how they were feeling about teleworking. So this will be a follow-up to that. And then ongoing, we're always happy to, looking for partnership opportunities, ways to support employers, and happy to help. So feel free to reach out at any time. And that's all of our
Great, thank you. Thank you, Zia.
contacts.
Yeah, great. Bill, did you have more that your team was going to share?
No, that was it. I guess, it sounds like we have some time for discussion, questions. I guess one of the questions on our part was just a little bit more backstory about the kind of the needs or perceived needs. I mean, our thought was that this effort is being driven by concerns of employers' ability to attract and maintain employees due to transportation issues, and that so it's more and that so in particular getting folks from Madison area up to jobs in Wanaki, could be from other areas outside the county as well. Don't know how much information you have on that or that you've collected from employers as to where their employees currently live. And so I guess that's something we'd be interested in hearing more about, because that obviously as was discussed, that impacts the kind of the potential solutions.
Yeah, we can, and I think it's reasonable to look at collaborating with the MPO to get good data to inform us. And I'd note that that transportation could be one of several factors that is a challenge for employers. And maybe with Bright Star on here with us, for the good of all of us listening, can your team share with us what your experiences have been and what have been the factors challenging your employment? And I guess I will share, maybe just for for everyone's sake, but for Roberta, who's covering this with the Tribune, for several years there has been discussions, informal discussions between employers and the village or at chamber events, where it's very common to hear one of the greatest challenges facing our major employers, well, all of our employers, is attracting employees and then keeping employees. So usually the major concern isn't that we hear isn't people in Wanaki seeking to have transportation alternatives into Madison, but the other way around, our employers getting employees. So that's been routine. Ellen, did you want to chime in on the type of things you hear from your chamber members? Sorry, putting you on the spot.
Nope. I would echo pretty much, Todd, what you did say. I mean, and right now we had a new member orientation this morning, and everybody's dealing with labor shortages. So in Waunakee, for sure, as well as maybe getting qualified people out to Wanaki. I know Bright Star, I've talked with Susan and Jeff about that too. So I would echo the same sentiments. It's even more so in the last year, obviously coming out of COVID. It's of great concern. So I think, anything that we can do I think data is very important to get, maybe, once again, do a survey or get something out to the employers and see where they're at, because so much has changed in the last 16 months. But I like the direction that this possibly could take, and partnering and helping with this in some way. I think it's a great idea that could be very well appreciated by our larger employees too out in the business park.
Thanks, Ellen. I'd add that in my city management circles, in communities that are very well served by mass transit, I'm hearing the same concerns from other managers who hear that from their business community, that employment is the greatest challenge. And that's that's when they've got robust programs in place to try to take transportation out of the equation as the challenge. So Tim, you worked in Sun Prairie prior to Wanaki. Perhaps you have perspective on what you've heard there. And then again, I would love to hear from our Bright Star reps here about what they're experiencing in real life.
Similar concerns when I was in Sun Prairie from the employers. One of the comments from the employers in that city's business park did have to do with transportation. So it was a twofold factor of housing cost and associated transportation. So their comments were that a lot of people, their employees, were living farther out east, Eastern Dane County or even outside of the county, and then would commute in via Highway 151. But transportation for those employers was a factor, or still is a factor.
Todd, we're seeing for Bright Star Senior Living, transportation is a huge effect. We reach out to candidates and have interviews, and then when you realize where they're at, they realize they don't have any transportation out to the Wanaki area, which is unique because in our west side of Madison community, we have a number of associates that are taking bus lines, being able to get to work on time. But that's our struggle here in Waunakee is, we get the people from the east side and the north side of Madison, but then they can't get here because they don't have the transportation to do so. One of the questions is could we get a ride share van where we as a company can operate ourselves?
I see Ben nodding. Ben, can you elaborate? Or
I think that Zia might be able to give you a fuller answer, but since I got called on, I'll try and do it. Certainly with something before you wanted to go and spend the money buying a vehicle and figuring out maintenance protocols, if you were to do something like the Commute with Enterprise, where they're going to be taking care of the maintenance and the purchase of the vehicle, and you just have to operate the thing, might be a really good way to do a pilot project. But certainly that, just as the specialty cheese company did, you could buy one or two vehicles and have one come from North Madison and one come from Middleton, and they could theoretically pick up employees along the way and be there in time for the shift start. So it's certainly a possibility.
Yeah, and so I'll add, just for the rideshare program, our role is really the connections to third parties like Commute with Enterprise or other resources, the support with marketing and communications, and the support with program development. So we don't ourselves have or operate any vans or anything like that. It's really about providing those connections.
There was one employer you mentioned that had done some work on this. Was it a cheese company or what was the one example employer that pursued
Yeah,
that?
Specialty Cheese in Reeseville.
Would they have a resource, someone on their end that employers could, like Ryan and his team there, reach out to learn directly from?
I would think so. Ben, were you involved directly with that program at all?
No, that was before my time. Zia and I started about 6 months apart in 2019. So we don't have a lot of institutional knowledge here, but I can certainly look around and see what I can find for contact information for that project.
Yeah.
Steve Steinhoff from Carpsey, I think, has that they were
Yes.
They were brought in as or they were going to speak at a conference that the county hosted, housing and transportation, same topic. So they had a contact. So he had a contact anyway. And Zia could certainly help in terms of getting a contact or having an initial communication and connecting you, Ryan, with someone at Enterprise to get to get a quote on what, for like a pilot project, if you wanted to go that route. Unless you have a vehicle that could be used, but I think that would be, then you're also having to worry about, I guess, insurance, with employees driving the van. It's so that would be cleaner, more expensive, most likely, but especially if you're not sure if this is going to be something that's going to be successful, don't want to make an investment in a vehicle and then have it turn out to not, to not work well. And that seems like it might be a good, at least pilot, pilot project to try it out.
Is there any insurance or anything involved with enterprise, or that's all part of that maintenance? They cover that.
They cover that, yeah.
All
It's all
covered.
built into the cost.
Okay.
One clarification, Ryan, if I could ask. So you aren't necessarily having trouble having people respond and express interest in your openings. It's that when it, go ahead.
It's both.
Oh,
It's
okay.
recruiting. I mean, I think people see Wanaki and it's like, I can't get there. It's both. The recruitment challenge, we don't have the number of bodies or people interested in looking too. And we believe some of it has relationship to transportation.
Todd, if you could send Ryan's contact info, then I can send you, Ryan, the contact for Enterprise and then also the brochure that we just had taken a screenshot of for the presentation.
Yeah,
So
Ryan, why
I
don't you
think those are too good.
stick your contact in there in the chat?
Okay, great. Yeah, those are two good avenues to explore, to see, that'll talking with Specialty Cheese and see how it worked for them to be doing their own program, and then hear from Enterprise what it would cost and what's involved if you go with them.
I was certainly hoping for some other employers to share specifics about their circumstances, so we could have MPO folks here directly respond to some of those unique situations. But let me suggest for those employers who aren't here in person but watching this recording, we do care to hear specifically what you're dealing with to see if we can connect a program to be a specific help to, or to find out if there are mutual circumstances with multiple employers in the community where we can seek collaboration. So that'll be a goal of ours going forward, to keep this communication moving ahead and try to make some strides together to help address the challenges. Maybe for the two Ryans and Jeff, do you have any anecdotal stories perhaps from your fellow employers in the community or in the region that you think would be good for us to also understand? Or is your story pretty similar across the board?
I think our stories are all pretty similar across the board.
Yeah. A couple of our larger employers I know, I think Unique for a time actually had some van pools that brought employees up, I think even from the Janesville, Rock County area. Although I think that's when they were supplementing a lot of their employment with temps. So it may have been something coordinated. I don't know if it was a temp agency or not, but I know that was part of their employment strategy for a while. It may or may not be still, I'm not sure. The largest employer in the village is our school district. Do any of the MPO folks, are you familiar with school districts that have shared transportation concerns for their employees with all of you, and have you helped with solutions for them?
I have not heard of that, but I think, it really comes back to the idea of having multiple employers with, similar, one of the big things is similar destination. You don't want to be trying to serve completely different destinations with the same van, especially if they're at completely different times. If somebody needs their employees there by 7 in the morning and the other that's 2 blocks away needs them there by 8:30, people aren't really going to want to show up an hour and a half early. So that's something that's sort of related. We haven't talked about that coordinating shift times can be really important to making this sort of thing work. The community that I was a transportation planner in before coming to the MPO, we had several large employers, Walmart, Costco, that complained about how their employees couldn't get there to stock shelves overnight. Fred Meyer, which is part of the Kroger family, changed their shifts so that their people could get there on the bus. Problem solved. They just moved the shifts by an hour and it was no big deal anymore. So, that sort of management change could really make things work a lot more smoothly for you. But whether it's the school district partnering with a widget manufacturer and senior living facility, it's okay that the jobs are all completely different, as long as you're trying to go to a reasonably similar destination at a reasonably similar period of time. Why not? It's okay. And it would really just come down to the agreement between those organizations in terms of cost sharing and scheduling and prioritization, and who's ultimately responsible for purchasing and maintaining the vehicles and that sort of thing.
Yeah, in a business park situation, for sure, that could be a real benefit to be for some of the employers to be getting together and talking about at that high level. What if we all went in together on a van pool program? What would that look like?
Well, I certainly think a good next step is to probably to undertake a survey collaboratively with MPO. Tim Semin and I will connect and discuss on that, and one of us will reach out back to you to probably kick that off and collaborate with the chamber to help promote that. So we will plan. You'll hear back from us to coordinate that work. I think that'll be useful as we consider what's next. I think that'll help inform us on, maybe that'll help us funnel down some things for our next conversation. I definitely want to have further engagement with Bright Star and other employers in the village to see how we can help crack the nut here.
That sounds great. That sounds great.
Todd, I did forward some information to you, both a contact for that specialty cheese transportation program at the county level there, and then also just their sort of fact sheet flyer I sent to you as well. So if you want to pass those along to others.
Yeah, Ryan, I just clicked send, so that's coming to you too. If you wanted to do a little process of discovery there.
Thank you.
And I'll send the enterprise info right away, and then I will look into the rideshare to see, what kind of numbers we can find about who's currently in that system, working or living in Wanaki.
That sounds great. This I'm glad I clicked record, but because what you guys shared on the top of the hour here is really going to be good background info for all of our employers if they don't know it already. So we'll be distributing that. I'd expect some follow-up questions, and we'll collaborate on next steps. Any other closing thoughts?
I've got one shameless plug. I'm putting a website.
We'll have to put $1 in the jar for that.
In the chat there. As I mentioned earlier, we are working on updating our regional transportation plan. And we certainly want to hear from folks throughout our planning area and throughout the county. So if you visit that site that I put the link in, you'll be able to follow along as we go through the process. There are recordings of public meetings and webinars there. There's maps. We'll be putting draft documents up. But most importantly, through July 9th, we have a public survey in both English and Spanish that's up. And that's really asking about people's current experiences with the transportation system in Dane County, what's working, what isn't, and trying to get feedback there. And then also on priorities for what we should be looking at in the future. So, please, if you have a moment or can, visit, fill out the survey, pass it on to other folks, because this is ultimately what will drive our long-range plan, which will include recommendations for things like commuter service by transit to Waunakee. So might just want to make sure you put in a plug for that.
No, that's good, Ben. And we have shared that on some of our social media, as has the chamber. And
Thank you.
I guess I'd ask Tim to consider whether another shout out to our community would be helpful. Westport, I know, has made the share across their community networks.
Yep.
So we'll double check and make sure that we're helping get that word out.
Great, thank you much.
One of the things before we finish, I thought I would mention, just it occurred to me for Ryan, for your situation in particular, is a possibility maybe is communicating with your current employers if there's anyone that would be willing to carpool. Typically with carpool arrangements, the way it works is people share the driving responsibilities, and that's what they like about it, is they don't have to drive every day. But if there were folks who were willing to carpool, essentially, it's the same arrangement as a van pool, where the people riding are paying and the person driving is not paying because their pay is, to drive the vehicle. I guess there's a possibility if someone were willing to do that, and pick up someone and arrange for that, and then the person riding would obviously have to work out a pay arrangement, but as an immediate type of thing, may or may not work, or there may or may not be interest in that, but that occurs to me that is a potential option.
All right, well, just I'll finalize with two quick shout outs. One to Bright Star, which is a great business. You guys, you're a wonderful business in our community. I'm glad you're engaging with us in a discussion, and we're glad you're here. You certainly filled an important niche in senior and assisted housing here in Wanaki, and it's noble. The work you do in our community is very noble and important. So thank you for being here. And then shout out to MPO crew, who for my 11 years here in Dane County, I've seen yeoman's work being done by your organization. Bill, you've been quite the fixture there, and you've run a good program and really eagerly have reached out to not just Madison. The Madison area is your focus area, and I've felt that. So Wanaki appreciates that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank
All
you.
right.
It was a great opportunity. Thanks for putting it together, Todd.
All right, appreciate it. And we'll to get the word out.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep.
Bye.
Have a great day.
So long.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Right.